Suicide Note, by Mitchell Heisman. This work is a computer-generated reading of Suicide Note, by Mitchell Heisman. This reading was produced using Natural Reader 14, a product of Natural Soft Limited. This work is free and licensed by Mitchell Heisman for copying and distribution under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivative Works 3.0 United States license. Part 1. God is Technology. How the singularity of monotheism transcended biology and primed the technological genesis of God. The genesis of God. From incorporation to symbolization, the ancient rupture off biological nature's path. Intelligence and prophecy. The singularity has been dismissed as rapture for the geeks. Perhaps there is something to this. Perhaps this characterization actually corroborates monotheism's original connection with the singularity. Perhaps Judaism was the original geek religion. As an educated guess, I would posit that the path to Judaism originated with a genetic mutation among Semitic populations that resulted in an intelligence advantage. Too much can be made of sheer IQ to the exclusion of other moral and behavioral characteristics of Jews, but an original intelligence advantage can help explain the evolutionary path that led to other more distinctive Jewish behavioral characteristics. Intelligence makes morality a foundational issue by allowing individuals to reason their way to new possibilities of immorality. Moses's group strategy inhibited certain Jewish disadvantages, capitalized on certain Jewish advantages, and prepared the basis for a self-reinforcing pattern that would eventually evolve them even further. Generally speaking, the Jewish tradition values the cultivation of the mind over the cultivation of the body. Moses devised a self-reinforcing civilizational strategy of moral learning and group self-empowerment that hinted, ever so imperfectly, at the ideal of God. According to the bell curve, intelligence and class structure in American life, Ashkenazi Jews of European origin test higher on IQ tests than any other ethnic group. 84 While there is clearly no shortage of perfectly stupid Jews congregating at the lower end of this bell curve, an evolutionary perspective raises the question of the origin of this difference. Pursuing this question should not be considered different from pursuing the origin of general differences in beak shape between different populations of finches. IQ alone does not begin to describe the Jewish cultural values that lay behind those results. As one of the most influential rabbis of the 20th century, Adin Steinsaltz, wrote, "Every culture has its elite people who represent the ideal that others strive to emulate or attain. In Jewish culture it is undoubtedly the scholars Talmidei Hakaman, literally pupils of the wise, who constitute this aristocracy." 85 Yet when the dust of tradition is cleared away, Judaism, at its roots, strived to emulate Moses and the prophets over scholars and God over Moses and the prophets. While prophets must be scholars on some level, scholars are by no means necessarily prophets. Those who believe that the correlation of the Jewish invention of monotheism and the high general intelligence level of Jews is simply a random coincidence are very much mistaken. If Jews are generally more intelligent, they also value intelligence. Higher intelligence can, at the very least, facilitate more effective learning. Learning is crucial because the Mosaic strategy often involves deliberately countering biological naturalism. Torah represents the wisdom of ancestors, gleanings of national experience condensed into a moral saga, and learning Torah is the condition of the Jewish way of life. The viability of the Mosaic way is dependent on learning Mosaic laws. The holy laws of a people simply do not work if that people does not learn the value of their study. The holiness of Torah study enables a sacred symbiosis wherein the Jewish memes of Torah are the blueprint of the preservation of both Jewish genes and the Torah memes themselves. The holiness of Jewish lives and Jewish texts reinforce one another. Learning Torah directs the behavior of Jews towards the kind of social existence where Jews can prosper and realize their values of Torah learning. In learning Torah, Jews learn the value of learning Torah. While this may be a self-reinforcing pattern for Jews who embrace the Jewish good life of Torah learning, it may be a self-enervating pattern for Jews who do not. Jews who lack the capacity and/or inclination toward the mental work of studying the moral teachings are less likely to imbibe Jewish values, and hence, less likely to value Judaism. Over the course of Jewish history, some went the way of the 10 lost tribes and dissolved into the Gentile world. The self-reinforcing gene mem symbiosis of Judaism is very likely responsible for the Jewish IQ advantage. The pattern is also strikingly similar to a theory of strong artificial intelligence called seed AI, a theory originated by Eliezer Yudkowsky, a co-founder of the Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence. Seed AI is a hypothetical artificial intelligence that is capable of comprehending, redesigning, and improving its own programs so that the self-improved AI is capable of further self-improvement, which will then be capable of further self-improvement, and so on. This basic idea of runaway, recursive self-improvement is one of the basic ideas behind the singularity. One way of approaching the idea of seed AI is to ask, what is the most intelligent life strategy? What could be more intelligent than making oneself still more intelligent? From this perspective, one can discern how biblical study embodies principles of seed AI. If the Torah and the Law is a distillation of Judaism's non-biological intelligence, and studying such books makes one still more intelligent, then this self-reinforcing pattern is a step in the direction of the principles of seed AI. If the most intelligent aspiration is the most intelligent being, and God represents the hypothetical imagination of the most intelligent being, then studying and following the ways of God is like imagining the next paradigm shift in non-biological intelligence after Torah study. The Bible, the single most influential spiritual and literary creation in the history of humanity, originated in the seed AI-like attempt of Jews to direct their own socio-biological evolution by improving their genetic program with the civilizational program of the laws of Moses. The moral self-control that Jews aspired towards required the use of religion memes as technology to control genetically based behavior. The radicalization of this step of gaining control over one's own foundational program is an origin of the idea of God. The empirical realization of this idea of God will most likely be realized in the ability of artificial intelligence to change and improve its own source code. At first glance, the notion that AI could have anything to do with ancient Jewish monotheism whatsoever might seem implausible. However, when outdated Enlightenment-era critiques of religion are re-evaluated in light of evolutionary history, it becomes clear that the monotheistic God was not simply a random, arbitrary product of the social engineering innovations of Mosaic law. The very condition of the ability to project naturalistic phenotypical Jewish behavior, and then counter or outsmart these expressions of Jewish genes, is foresight. Just as foresight was required to project patterns of Jewish behavior into the future and then engineer social laws to modify those behaviors, foresight was required to imagine the superlative being that brings these powers to their ultimate conclusion in total power over nature. The foresight at the roots of biblical intelligence was economic as well as social. It survives in the Jewish proclivity for recognizing large-scale international social and economic trends. Mosaic law was not for one generation, but for all future generations of Jews. Hope in culmination in a messianic age for all humankind came directly out of an extrapolation of control over nature into the future. The intelligence-maximizing, self-reinforcing pattern of memes engineered to overcome genes projected towards its most logical and most radical extreme culminated in the ultimate meme, God. In this way, God is a projection of ultimate intelligence, and an ancient, foresightful steering of human destiny away from slavery to biology, and towards the path that leads towards artificial intelligence and the singularity. The ultimate vindication of the monotheistic insight with the rule of a well-constructed God AI over the relatively irrationality of our genetically based impulses. The social disharmony of the Jewish kinship paradox is Jewish genetic naturalism. To preserve this genetic naturalism is the logic of the selfish gene. But foresight leads one to the conclusion that the probable consequence of the Jewish kinship paradox is political existential self-destruction. In order to survive at all, then, Jews had to oppose their own genes. This is how the Jewish kinship paradox forms a root of the Jewish national/international paradox. Jewish national identity is inseparable from overcoming Jewish genes, and overcoming Jewish genes is inseparable from a tendency towards humanistic internationalism. The Jewish national/international paradox means that Jews are fundamentally different because Judaism allowed Jews to outsmart their own genes, and hence, survive despite some of their hereditary inclinations. Survival through overriding the selfish genes was the alternative to the overwhelming more common method of solving such maladaptive problems over biological history, natural selection via death. So for Jews to survive, Jews had to selectively overcome certain selfish genes. In opposing the ultimate logic of the selfish gene, monotheism opposed natural selection. In opposing natural selection, the gap in the extreme biological naturalistic system became filled with the extreme logic of superbiological evolution. This extreme logic of foresight through the practical transcendence of natural selection is what reached its pinnacle in the idea of an all-powerful, superbiological God. Technology, i.e. artificial intelligence, may represent the most advanced form of superbiological evolution, a possible realization of the predicted properties of the monotheistic God. Once again, the Jewish kinship paradox meant that Jewish genetic inclination led to self-destructive infighting behavior as a group, especially in a world in which Gentiles are not hampered by this particular form of socio-biological primitivity. This means that pure biology leads to a dead end for Jews. The bizarre survival success of Jews over 3,000 years likely began with the foresight to recognize that they were likely unable to compete with other nations at the ancient, conventional political game. This foresight very probably converged with capitalist foresight, i.e. an extrapolation of capitalist processes towards a material development that culminates towards God. The Jewish path seems like a rebellion against nature to some. The root truth in this is that nature would have declared Jews dead if they had not been one step ahead of nature. Jews and Judaism owe their existence to the outsmarting of distinctly biological forms of evolution. Judaism began by being one step ahead of biology by knowing biology. One way of interpreting the Mosaic solution to the Jewish kinship paradox is genes outsmarting themselves. To totally outsmart the genes in a literal sense would be biological death. But to totally outsmart the genes in a more selective sense would be, for example, to transfer biological intelligence to a technologically superior substrate, i.e. a computer. The latter solution is analogous to the Jewish choice of life through the transcendence of biology. God is a logical corollary of Mosaic law because Mosaic law that outsmart biology, taken to its extreme, lead to the discovery of the paradigm shift symbolized and grasped as God. Going one step further, the idea of genes that outsmart themselves is comparable to the idea of an artificial intelligence that outsmarts itself by improving its own basic program. These are two analogous steps in a larger progression, just the non-biological intelligence of Mosaic law outsmarted biology, God AI would presumably outsmart its own source code. The possibility of God was latent in the possibility of outsmarting one's own genes. The viability of Jewish adherence to Mosaic law was the empirical proof that set Jewish sights on the possibility of bringing God into the world. Judaism is a meta-socio-biological technology that builds towards God. Yet if Jewish genes naturally express the human-level aspects of the effective program of Jewish religious law, there would have been no need for Mosaic Judaism, and Jews would probably not have discovered the God paradigm. Just as Jewish Mosaic lawyers healed the socio-biological body, Jewish doctors healed the individual body. Lawyers and doctors are related in the civilizational sense of technologically correcting nature. Modern doctors and lawyers both implicitly or ideally reject the justice of natural selection embraced by the Nazis that improves the world by killing, rather than correcting, those believed to possess biological weaknesses. One reason why Jews appeared primitive to Nazis is that the reason of the state in a Hegelian sense can come into conflict with the reason of the individual. Judaism moved away from the socio-biological development that inclines towards the political state in favor of evaluation of individual lives that promotes individual intellectual moral development. Or, from a different perspective, Jewish intelligence as individuals evolved in compensation for Jewish political stupidity as a nation. Jews would have to be complete idiots to think that they have any kind of monopoly whatsoever on intelligence. Unfortunately, there is a small minority of Jews that seem to entertain just this kind of stupidity. Nothing could be more delusional than the belief that just because Jews spearhead an evolutionary path that in some ways correlates with the singularity, that his bestows any kind of privileged position whatsoever towards the ultimate outcome. There is not a single reason to think that China or India, peoples with no deep monotheistic tradition, could not be the first develop the first AI and the character of all future evolution that follows from it. Those with the greatest foresight may be those most likely to be the singularity, i.e. to be God. Yet God AI would necessarily be the culmination of all human effort that has driven post-biological evolution forward. To posit that a post-biological God AI should be is to posit that a post-nationalistic world should be. Yet if it is true that intelligence itself made morality a foundational issue by allowing people to reason their ways to deeds devoid of conscience, superintelligence will make morality a mortal issue. The internationalism of the singularity movement can be advanced by spreading consciousness of the common human interest in giving God a conscience.